Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. Today we are a little bit discussing about strategic affairs and generally we'll make it academic that what is the value of democracy today, because the biggest export of democracy has been made by the US to the world. And today we are at a crossroads, and we cannot write it off, wrong it off, or erase it, but we have to see what is there today and what is can be the future. So we have a very famous strategic expert guest, and he has traveled far and wide. And with us, without delay, let us welcome my great friend and an expert, Shri Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Namaskar, Abhijit. Abhijit, what do you think? Like sitting in India, and we have heard, like you have heard from all of us have heard how democracy is great and democracy is one of the best ideals or institutions. No doubt it has helped the whole world. What is your viewpoint today in the world about democracy?
Look, to be honest, I've never much liked democracy. To quote Winston Churchill, democracy is the most awful system in the world, except for all the other systems which are even worse. Right? So, democracy in that sense is the least worst of a whole set of bad systems. That said, the issue has always been that in the US electoral rules have always been something of a joke in India.
Mhm.
We've given that our electorate is what, 3-4 times the size of the US electorate. We always seem to run better elections than the Americans, clearer rules than the Americans. Even when it comes to vote tampering and ballot box stuffing, we have always been more scientific about it. And in the process of curtailing electoral fraud, again, we have been much, much more scientific about it, be it in terms of forcing people to register beforehand, for people to show up with valid photo IDs, for their names to match on the electoral roll, for you to verify your vote through a paper trail. For a while, there wasn't a paper trail, and now when you press the button in the electronic machine, you get a printout with your party symbol on it to confirm that you have in fact voted for the party that you thought you pressed the button for, and so on and so forth. Now, that being the case, sitting in India, I think American elections have been viewed as something of a joke ever since the Al Gore Florida debacle. And, we were quite amazed that the US Supreme Court at that point held that the process was sacrosanct. It didn't matter what the result was, but the process was sacrosanct. When the process was clearly so flawed, it is one thing when a process is sacrosanct, when it has a great deal of integrity. It is quite another for a process to be sacrosanct when it has zero integrity. Now, imagine the same people claiming that the 2020 elections were absolutely clean and whatever under Trump, were the same people claiming that the election process of 2016 was completely compromised by the Russians under Obama. So who was colluding with the Russians? I mean, from their own argument, it seems to me Obama was the one colluding with the Russians to bring Trump to power, and Trump wasn't colluding with anyone to remove himself from power. So, there's, I think it's becoming a bigger joke by the day. Day after day, this is just becoming a bigger joke. Anyway.
So this is the viewpoint. Is this a viewpoint generally in India, or it's a global viewpoint? Then I'll like to see how Chinese are viewing it and how Russians are viewing it.
I can't really say, because the entire opinion industry is under the control of the left. If you say things they don't like, they deplatform you, they remove your apps, they lock your account. They kick you off Twitter, they kick you off YouTube, they kick you off everything. So we don't really know. Because what is happening today in America is exactly what the Chinese Red Guards used to do under Mao. This is what the Bolsheviks did under Stalin and Lenin. Today, America is a very, very feeble reproduction of communist China and Stalin's Russia. There is no real difference. Okay, you have people who are penalizing senators or legislators for voting a certain way. You have businesses and universities penalizing legislators for claiming there was electoral fraud. You have business platforms and applications basically removing people that they disagree with. Uh, uh, I remember this it wasn't so much in the Soviet Union as it was in East Germany when I was growing up. But people who disagreed with the government, they had their educational qualifications withdrawn for anti-state attitudes and anti-state activities. And I'm sitting here and thinking, the more we progress, the more we go back. Today, there is literally no difference. The Soviet Union, this is a big myth that the Soviet Union lost the Cold War in 1991. The communists lost the USSR in 1991. They seem to have gained the USA in whenever. It's not a clear timeline, but they seem to have come back with a bang. All right. And now it's America's turn to go the same way the USSR went.
See, one of the what I see is that the biggest people who are laughing at US today is China. It looks like they have beaten US to a game without firing a weapon, and they brought the entire American political landscape and American leadership in question throughout the world. Is that your view, or you have some alternative view also on this one? Do you think that way?
Look, Biden is definitely compromised. His son is, I don't know if Biden's compromised, but his son is compromised. And if what that whistleblower said on Fox is true, that Biden said the name of the game is plausible deniability, then clearly Biden is also compromised to China. There's the issue of that 2 carat diamond ring or whatever it was that Hunter Biden was given. We still don't know what's come of all of that because the investigation is definitely ongoing. It clearly wasn't Russian disinformation. There is more tangible information there than there ever was against Trump. So let's see what's happening because I I've seen this happen under the Obama administration. Obama wanted a G2 where which was basically a reprise of the USA USSR. They'd split up the world between each other into spheres of influence. China said, no, screw you, get lost. So then he fell back. Obama fell back on multilateralism. Then he came up with the Asian pivot, which was the biggest joke I've ever seen, because they moved from 800 kilometers off the Chinese coast to about 1,500 kilometers off the Chinese coast. So instead of going closer to China, they went further away from China. And the way we have a brain dead media, they were all celebrating this, saying, oh, look, he's so tough on China. In fact, that is what one of the things I'm going to watch out for what Biden does on China. Because he's going to do a lot of things which the press is going to say is, oh my God, it's so brave. He's finally taking on China, this, that, la-di-da-di-da. If you actually examine the minutiae of the decisions, it would actually be helping China in a sense. Right? So I'm not. I expect nothing but bad things from this government.
So coming to the, you also did mention the threat of deplatformization. I've been writing about it for last 2 years. I was the first one to warn in Sunday Guardian article. They said this is a possibility because no entrepreneur can launch their app unless they are on the Google or Apple. It's like a binary, 0 or 1, and both are American and both are controlled by private corporations whose agenda is different than any nation. In fact, they themselves call themselves a nation. Now, do you think it's an arrival of the sci-fi world where the big corporations rule it and the common people, if they're on the platform, there's a threat of free speech violation for them. What is
No,
it?
it's not a sci-fi world. In fact, it's going back to traditional historical patterns. If you look at it, the most clearly attested early record of this is the Egyptian Old Kingdom. So, under the first dynasty, which is considered mythical, Narmer, Menes, whatever you want to call him, there was this centralization of power. Historically attested is starts off with the third dynasty, and then the fourth dynasty, which is what builds the pyramids, the bent pyramid, the red pyramid, the Khufu's pyramid in Giza, and all of that, where you have heavily centralized power. And then by the time of the sixth dynasty, you have these nomarchs, these feudal lords who arise, who control the agricultural production and so on and so forth. And you have the first intermediate period where the power of the state completely breaks down. And Egypt goes through 3, 4 of these phases. You look at Mesopotamia go through 3, 4 of these phases. The Akkadian Empire, for example, again, very cognate with the Egyptian old kingdom. A similar process happening in Mesopotamia. We don't know the history of the Indus Valley because we haven't been able to decipher their written records. But you see this in Rome, for example. Okay, in Rome, a similar process happens, though it takes a much longer time. Initially, what you have is you have a few powerful tyrants, and then you have the Roman nobility sort of taking control away from them. Then you have the rise of the Caesars. And by the time of about 400 AD, you have a complete breakdown into feudalism in Europe. You see Persia follow the same pattern. Okay, very strong centralized state under the Achaemenids, which then breaks down. One more, the Sassanids were always, the Parthians were always kind of feudal, but under the Sassanids, same process: centralization, decentralization. This is, of course, the root of King John and the Magna Carta, right? Everybody thinks that the Magna Carta was this great charter of freedom. It was not. And this is what people don't understand. Decentralization brings severe disorder. People grow discontented with centralization. They think it's the worst thing possible till they realize decentralization is far, far, far worse. And what happens with decentralization, you can see with King John and the Magna Carta. The popular legend is that King John was this evil brother of King Richard, and he tried to take away the people's rights and all that rubbish. And the nobles forced him at the field of Runnymede to sign the Magna Carta. Complete shit. Okay, King John was actually quite popular. It was the nobles who were unpopular, and you actually look at the suppression of the common people and lawlessness and things like that. It goes through the roof after the signing of the Magna Carta. Because, why? You have these feudal lords completely absorb power. Now, power, like, the monopoly on violence is good when it's centralized. When it starts getting decentralized, the more people you have, the more the violence, the more the selective application of laws, which is the most dangerous thing you can have. This is a historical pattern. I thought, people had read enough history to not repeat this pattern again. And clearly we're very wrong, because, the tragedy of history is that we never learn from history. As the saying goes, we learn from history that we never learn from history. And that's pretty much what you're seeing now.
See, the philosophy of the world is to reject the ancient history and also to create a new
It's not,
history, or
remember, it's not history, it's misogynistic patriarchy.
commonly mythology. They consider everything as mythology, and then there's a problem is, like you said, we don't you don't learn from what needs to be learned from the history. It brings to a very important other point, is that in last 300 since 1776, America has exported democracy again. And this is, again, I'm repeating the question again, because you're given a lot of context here. Has exported democracy to everyone, and the biggest adopter, I'm not saying adopter of democracy was India. And 2022 new elections are coming up, and these American social media giants who deplatformized American president and other social media outlets who were opposing them, is just unheard of in the US. Just out, delete, you're gone. Do you think that can be repeated in the world's biggest democracy? Because just now, Uganda elections are happening, and Ugandan elections, they have banned social media. Russia has started putting clamps, and other people. All of them are very scared. China never had American social media presence in their country. What is going to happen to India, where 700 million electoral voters are there?
So first of all, the good thing is social media hasn't penetrated all these 700 million electorate. Okay, on Twitter and Facebook, there is some, but most of them, prefer local content and local platforms. Second, I would completely dispute this notion of America exporting democracy. America thinks it exported democracy. It did nothing of the sort. If you realize when most countries democratized, it happens when the digital revolution in the 80s and then the information revolution in the 90s replaces the manufacturing revolution that had predominated the economy right through to the 70s. Okay, so what happens is that industrialization, manufacturing requires the centralization of state power. Uh, Whereas the digital and information age requires the state to take a backseat. It's a very natural process in that sense, right? So you look at this period. Why is it that countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Turkey, Spain, Portugal, they all start democratizing only from the 80s through the 90s? Is it because America kind of exported stuff to them? No, it's because the economics of the period demanded it in that sense, right? So that's what we see actually happening at that point of time. So it wasn't particularly an American export; it was more of a natural process that happened. Eastern Europe, for example, it was the collapse of the Soviet Union that precipitated it. And we need to differentiate between two things: the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. One did not lead to two; they were two completely different things. The breakup of the Soviet Union was achieved by the USA through, mostly by the Soviets' own bad economics. The end of the Cold War was mutually agreed on. So there's a lot of confusion between cause and effect out here. But going forward, what I see out here is precisely because we tend to conflate, and assume somehow that this is more democracy. We are going back to that period of Athenian democracy where, Socrates was forced to drink poison. We are going from democracy to mob rule. Please understand, we are all republics. We are not democracies. Republics came up for a reason because democracy was considered too dangerous. Direct interference democracy was considered too dangerous. That is why we came up with republics. And what you're seeing today is the classic corruption of a republic, either by what used to be feudal lords. In the pre-industrial age, you only had feudal lords. In the post-industrial age, you have ecosystem. You have universities, you have industry, you have business, who all essentially create the feudal class. In that sense, if you look at Pakistan, where there's a military-industrial nexus, a military-industrial landowner nexus, it's the same thing in America as well. That is the fundamental nature of an economy. That is how the economy works. Just because one is a pre-industrial country and another is a post-industrial country doesn't mean it's any different, right? So, and if you want to understand what happens if economies refuse to digitize or information age eyes, look at North Korea. People forget North Korea had the second highest per capita income after Japan till 1979. North Korea was the success story. South Korea was the dumb failure in those days, right? And North Korea refused to move into the information age. They refused to move into the digital age, which is why they completely deindustrialized. So, this is a much more complex social phenomenon.
So you mentioned some important point here. My next question was coming to now these, you can see that with the I'm still waiting for January 28th. After the oath, I'm going to wish everybody, but still waiting. But coming back to the students actually in the campuses, and a lot of students are here right now. Now, from according to the students, most of them are very confused because they were told a republic which is a rule of law and control, and probably they are told the best nation on the world, which has ever existed on the planet. That's the campaign names which are given, and also reviving American exceptionalism now, where the America is the global de facto ruler of the world, and the so this is being told. But now when they're seeing the foreign countries independently, openly boycotting or banning American leadership things like now today's symbols are Google and Microsoft and all these other globally recognized names. So the challenge is happening within the churn is happening within the minds, where are we really the leaders, or we were some dictators, or what is happening with us?
What's happening is classic imperial overextension, hubris, echo chambers, this sense of we're the best, nothing can touch us. Remember, America's greatness was founded based on a constant striving towards greater freedom of speech, okay, greater personal freedoms. Somewhere in that, they confused the independence that that government should stay out of business, but they never made the reciprocal arrangement that business should stay out of government. Okay, and that, in with the benefit of hindsight, is now the classic flaw of the American model. Now, what we see here is a variation on typical imperial overextension. Britain overextends too much, ultimately it has to collapse. Because people don't realize this, Britain was spending more on the upkeep of the empire than it was actually making off the profits of that empire. Towards the end of the British Empire, there were only three surplus colonies, Nigeria, Burma, and Malaysia. And there was a reason for that. Nigeria because of the oil, Burma because of the teak, and Malaysia because of rubber. Okay, all the other colonies were deficit colonies, where, including India, were deficit colonies that Britain had to expend disproportionately more to keep under subjugation than it was making off. The same thing happens with Rome. The cost of protecting the empire is far greater than the revenue that the empire is generating. Today, you see that, but it is not a physical overextension, it's an ideological overextension. Okay, and you're seeing it collapse onto itself. All these historical patterns are repeating. And like Mark Twain says, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So it's not an exact repetition, but it's a rhyming of those same notes of history that you traditionally see.
You made some very good points here, where you emphasize that how the economics drive. Now, there's a very good Chinese analyst. I forgot the name. I think Yang. He's a foreign analyst of China. Recently said, and just 2 weeks back, 3 weeks back, he said that we have an economic system. It's called free market economy, where America has a capitalistic economy where the corporations control the government. But in China, corporations cannot control the government. And my retort to that was, it is the Chinese Communist Party controls the business. They are opening the business over there. So what is your viewpoint
Uh,
on that?
both are flawed models. In China, the government controls business. In America, it seems that the business controls government. Okay, and they are both deeply, deeply flawed models. And this is where you have the Indian model, which is, according to me, the Arthashastra model, which amazingly comes about in about 2,200 years back, about 250, 300 BC or so, wherein you have 2300 BC, where, no, sorry, 2300 years back, about 300 BC, where the Arthashastra of Chanakya is very, very clear. The king's job is very, very simple. He provides internal security, he provides external security, he provides a fantastic business regulation mechanism, he provides an excellent judiciary, and that's about it. He does not do anything else. He does not interfere in business. In return, business shuts its mouth and stays the hell out of government. And this did not happen in the previous dynasty. In the previous dynasty, the Nanda dynasty, the Nanda kings used to interfere in businesses, and businesses used to bribe the kings and screw things over, which is why that dynasty fell. You see, Chandragupta, who Chanakya was a minister of, his own successor, Ashoka, turned to a full on socialist model. And imagine this happens about 2,200 years before Karl Marx. He turns into a full on MyBap state control model. And the economy collapses during his lifetime. People tell you the Mauryan Empire collapsed after Ashoka. It did not. Ashoka, the empire starts collapsing. You can see it from the numismatics, from the coinage of the Ashokan period, that the value of the Mauryan coinage is going down. Okay, there's some economic turmoil happening. Why? Because you need to maintain this clear barrier. State cannot enter business, but business cannot enter state either. And I think this is where we're realizing, people used to say, with the benefit of hindsight, America is a true capitalist, Britain, and therefore it will not collapse. Unlike Britain, which was mercantilist, it wasn't pure capitalist, and that's why it collapsed. And what we're realizing now is even America is not true capitalist. Okay, true capitalism has to be the state remains the state and business remains business. Because the imperatives of state are very different from the imperatives of business. When business starts controlling the state, then you have serious, serious problems. Right? Because personal interest is seldom the collective interest. And the idea of the nation state is the collective interest. There's many different historical analogies to be drawn here, but needless to say, China hasn't got it right, but neither does America at the moment.
Thank you so much for your time today. And I would like to just sum it up. When somebody says that I can tell you something better than what you know, or I have something better and rest of you follow, then it doesn't remain a democracy. There's not a collective will there. And I'll end over there. Thank you so much for your time. And for the viewers who watched it live, do watch it on YouTube and let us know what you feel. Namaskar and thank you.